I was told to stay outside during my granddaughter's piano recital because my daughter-in-law said, "Your face stresses her out." I sat in the parking lot listening from a cracked window as they applauded inside. When I got home, I found her social media post mocking me, but she had no idea what was already in motion, and when the school board called her in the next day. I remember sitting in my car, the engine off, clutching my coat like it was a shield, staring at the cracked edge of the parking lot window. Inside the school auditorium, my granddaughter's piano recital was in full swing, and I wasn't allowed in. "Your face stresses her out," my daughter-in-law had said, smiling sweetly like she'd just handed me a cup of tea. Sweet. That word died the second I saw the way her eyes had narrowed the second I arrived. I should have known better than to argue. I'd raised my son, watched him stumble through college, helped him move into his first apartment. I'd been there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak. And now, as I sat in a damp parking lot in Oak Park, Illinois, my own family had decided I wasn't safe enough to breathe the same air as my granddaughter for 20 minutes. The auditorium doors opened periodically, and the faint, muffled sound of applause reached me through the cracked glass. I could hear her little fingers hitting the piano keys, the notes faltering once, correcting themselves, building to the song's climax. I imagined her glancing at the empty seat where I should have been, hoping maybe I'd magically appear. But no, I was outside, alone. Afterwards, I sat in the car long enough to hear the final applause, the standing ovation, even the teacher's whispered praise that leaked through the walls. Then the quiet, heavy shuffle of shoes heading back to their cars, their laughs, their conversations. I felt my chest tighten as I realized she would never see my face as she bowed, never feel my proud smile. My presence had been erased from the moment entirely. And then I saw it. My daughter-in-law had posted a picture of me outside. She captioned it with the kind of mockery that dripped venom disguised as humor. "When grandma really stresses you out, even the parking lot gets a front row seat." She tagged half the school parents, neighbors, everyone who mattered in this small town. I could feel my face heat up, a mix of shame and fury curling in my stomach, but I didn't cry, not yet. I didn't know it then, but she had no idea what was already in motion. She didn't know the calls I had quietly made earlier that week, the small seed of consequence I had planted without her realizing, and she wouldn't see it coming. Not tomorrow, not next week. Not until the school board called her into that small office, the one where smiles didn't matter, only facts and rules and repercussions. As I drove home from the recital, the evening wind biting through the half-open car window, I felt my fury sharpen into something cold and precise. She had humiliated me. She had humiliated my granddaughter by weaponizing her own insecurities against me, and she had thought it was a private victory. She had no idea that the dominoes were already lined up, the first one nudged in motion by a quiet, determined hand. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the laptop screen, the social media post still open. I could see the likes, the laughing emojis, the thinly veiled "I told you so" comments. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the disbelief and the sting, a plan started to form. Not a childish retaliation, not a scene in a grocery store aisle, something far more deliberate, something she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I knew exactly how it would start, and I knew that by the time it ended, the smug, condescending smile she had worn like armor today would be gone. But first, I had to wait. I've always been the kind of grandmother who showed up, uninvited if I had to, because family mattered. My son Alex had been the center of my world long before I met my daughter-in-law, Clara. When Alex married her, I thought it would be fine. Clara had charm, she smiled, she seemed organized, but charm can be a mask, and organization can be weaponized. I should have known from the start that Clara didn't just want a family, she wanted control. It started small, birthday parties where I was subtly excluded, holidays where my seating was decided after everyone else had chosen theirs. She criticized my cooking, my voice, my way of holding my granddaughter Emma. I tried to overlook it at first. Everyone has quirks. But then came the real poison. The times she whispered to Emma that grandma could be too intense or scary if she got upset. She was planting doubt in my granddaughter's mind about me, and I could feel it slowly taking root. I've never been a passive person. When Alex and I first realized what Clara was doing, I tried confronting her gently, diplomatically. I tried to shield Emma without creating fights, but Clara wasn't gentle. She didn't compromise. She thrived on twisting things until she could make me look like the villain in the room, even when she started it. Her ability to manipulate extended even to Alex, my own son, who is kind and soft-hearted to the point of weakness. He didn't want conflict, so he let her define reality. By the time Emma was 6, it was obvious. Clara had constructed a perfect little world where I was inconvenient at best, a problem at worst. Recitals, soccer games, birthday parties, I was always too much or too intense, and Emma absorbed it. It broke my heart. But it also ignited something I hadn't felt in years, the need for justice. Not in some violent, dramatic sense, but in a precise, unstoppable way. If Clara thought she could humiliate me, erase me from my granddaughter's life, and get away with it, she was wrong. I started watching her patterns. I documented every slight, every whisper, every passive-aggressive text. She kept an image polished and sweet online, but reality in our house was cold. I kept copies, emails, photos, screenshots. Small things at first. A post mocking me, a deleted comment, a photo of Emma taken in a moment of frustration that she captioned to make me look ridiculous. Then I made subtle calls. Teachers, school administrators, anyone who could verify the pattern she was weaving. Nobody knew I was connecting the dots. They just thought I was a concerned grandmother. Clara had no idea that every public slight, every private jab was being recorded, catalogued, and turned into leverage. She believed she had crafted the perfect narrative. I'm a sweet, doting mom. Grandma is unstable, dramatic, overbearing. And because Alex wouldn't challenge her, no one else questioned it. But for every laugh she got online, every emoji mocking me, I made sure the right people were quietly noticing, and the right evidence was quietly gathering. When she told me today, standing in the hallway outside the recital, that my face stresses Emma out, I didn't react. I didn't argue, I nodded. I went to the car. And while she clutched her smug victory like a trophy, I was thinking 10 steps ahead. I had a plan already in motion, and it wasn't about embarrassment or revenge in the petty sense. This was about exposing her for exactly who she was, and doing it in a way that would leave no room for excuses. Clara believed she had the upper hand. She believed she controlled the narrative. And Emma, well, she was still the innocent observer, but I'd make sure she never had to see me silenced again. Not like this. By the time she thought she'd won, it would already be too late for her to stop what was coming. And tomorrow, when the school board called, she would finally meet consequences she never imagined could exist outside her perfect little social media world. The next morning I woke up early before Clara or Alex. Sunlight spilled weakly through my kitchen window, catching the edges of the stack of papers I had organized the night before. Emails printed, screenshots laid out, timelines written in careful detail, everything lined up like a map for the inevitability I had been building. Each slight, each manipulation, each post mocking me was documented. I didn't just want her embarrassed. I wanted accountability, and I knew exactly how to engineer it. I started by contacting the school quietly, not in a way that screamed revenge or personal grievance. No, I kept my tone calm, factual, measured. I emailed the recital coordinator, the music teacher, even the principal. I highlighted moments I had observed over the past year, repeated instances where Emma seemed anxious, where my presence, or even the threat of it, was painted as a problem by Clara. I phrased it in terms of concern for the child, masking the underlying motive. Every word was precise, like a surgeon's incision. By mid-morning, I had compiled a separate file for the school board. Clara's online posts, her comments about me. All the documented manipulations of both my son and my granddaughter. I didn't include a word of my own opinion. It was all her words, her actions. The evidence practically screamed what she thought she was hiding. She had assumed her posts were private victories, shared with like-minded friends, but they were now part of a dossier that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, I kept my composure around Alex. He asked me if I was okay after the recital, worried because I had been so quiet. I smiled almost gently. I'm fine, I said, just tired. Emma played beautifully. He nodded, still unaware of the storm quietly building under my calm exterior. He never saw the full weight of Clara's cruelty, not until it was too late. Then came the most delicate part, setting the trap without tipping her off. Clara still believed she had control, that her social media post had been a small victory, that no one could touch her, so I made sure she saw me as harmless. I left her a message that afternoon, politely thanking her for letting me know where to sit, making my voice sound meek, almost defeated. I wanted her to feel confident, smug even, because the more secure she felt, the less cautious she would be. By evening, I had rehearsed every possible angle, every way she might try to deflect responsibility, every lie she could tell. I wasn't just documenting her, I was predicting her, anticipating the moves of someone who had been weaponizing appearances for years. And as I prepared Emma's lunch for the next day, I caught a glimpse of Clara posting online again, laughing at her own joke, utterly oblivious. It was perfect. The moment she thought she was untouchable, the pieces were already sliding into place. I knew exactly how the next 24 hours would unfold. My evidence in front of the school board, her social media oblivion, and the first real confrontation she couldn't escape. And as I closed my laptop, a calm, precise fury settled over me. The seed of her downfall had been planted weeks ago, watered slowly by patience and careful maneuvering. I wasn't acting out of impulse. I was acting as a force she could never outsmart because she had been underestimating me for years. But just when I thought everything was aligned perfectly, I noticed something chilling in one of her public posts. A subtle threat, a line that suggested she had been monitoring me more closely than I realized. My stomach dropped, and I realized that even as I orchestrated her exposure, she might already have a contingency I hadn't anticipated. And that's when I understood. This was no longer just about a recital, a post, or a snide remark. This had become a battle of wits, a war. And she had just made the first counter move. The next morning I drove to the school early, clutching my folder like a shield. My hands were steady, but my mind raced. I walked into the office and asked to speak to the school board chair, careful to keep my voice neutral. The secretary nodded, glanced at the neatly organized packet in my hand, and led me down the narrow hallway. I felt calm, confident even, until I saw Clara. She was there, not sitting nervously as I expected, but leaning against the wall with that smug, practiced smile, scrolling through her phone. My stomach dropped. How had she known? My first thought was panic. Had she already called the principal? Had she deleted evidence or lied to the board? But then I remembered, she thrived on appearances, not reality. Whatever she thought she was doing, it hadn't accounted for the depth of my preparation. The board members arrived, and Clara's confidence never wavered. I handed over my packet, my voice calm and precise. I'd like to discuss concerns regarding my granddaughter's well-being and the environment she's exposed to. As I spoke, I noticed Clara shift subtly, her hand twitching over her phone. But she didn't interrupt, not yet. She was waiting for the right moment to attack, to spin this as me overreacting, overstepping my boundaries. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. One of the board members, a teacher who had been quietly observing, interrupted me. "Mrs. Sanders, we've actually received reports about online posts mocking other parents and family members, including someone from your child's family." My pulse stopped for a moment. That was new. Someone had already flagged Clara's social media, and the timestamp on the printouts they had matches last night. I hadn't done that. I realized then that Clara had underestimated not me, but someone else who had been watching. Someone had been following her posts, noticing her cruelty, and had quietly brought it to the board's attention. The implications hit me like a punch. I wasn't the only one taking notes. Her public mockery had created an invisible ally, someone who recognized her manipulation for what it was. Clara's smug expression faltered for the first time as the board began reviewing evidence I hadn't even collected: posts, comments, screenshots, all showing her mockery, her manipulations, her toxic control over Alex and Emma. And suddenly I felt a surge of exhilaration. I hadn't anticipated this, but the consequences she was about to face were going to be bigger than anything I had planned. Clara tried to interrupt, tried to spin her version of events, but the board ignored her, already seeing the pattern. Her phone buzzed constantly, a distracting hum of notifications she couldn't check without looking guilty. My pulse quickened, a strange mix of fear and excitement. Her carefully curated life of control, her smug social media empire, it was unraveling, faster than I could have engineered myself. And then she did something even more reckless. She shot me a glare, sharp enough to cut, and whispered under her breath, just loud enough for me to catch, "You think this is over?" I swallowed hard. That little comment, that tiny spark of defiance, told me one thing: this was going to get darker. She wasn't just a narcissist, she was dangerous, cunning, and desperate. She would fight back and she would escalate. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I had already built contingencies for her contingencies. Every move she made had already been anticipated. Every lie, every attack, every desperate attempt to shift blame. And when the board finally made their decision, she wouldn't just be embarrassed. She would be exposed in a way that would leave no room for denials, no way to spin it. Her smirk faltered as the board members murmured, flipping through the evidence. She didn't know it yet, but the trap had fully closed around her. And I realized, for the first time, that I wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. I was about to watch the full unraveling of someone who had believed she was untouchable. And the worst part for her, I hadn't even finished. After the board meeting, I went straight home. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the momentum I had unleashed. Clara's smirk had vanished in the office, replaced by the tiniest flicker of panic. I could see it in her eyes, even from the corner of the room when she thought no one was looking. That tiny crack in her armor was everything I needed. I spent the next few hours meticulously planning the next phase. This wasn't just about exposing her to the school board anymore. It was about ensuring she couldn't quietly recover, rewrite her narrative, or manipulate Alex back into her corner. I needed to strike at the heart of her reputation, at the place she valued most, her image as the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect, sweet, family influencer. First, I mapped out every social media account she used, every local group she lurked in, every school parent she had ever privately messaged. I created a timeline of her manipulations, matching them with public posts where she laughed, mocked, or subtly shamed me. Each entry included a screenshot, a date, and the exact impact it had on Emma or Alex. This wasn't petty revenge, it was an irrefutable dossier of consistent, targeted abuse. Next, I quietly reached out to a few parents who had noticed similar patterns. I didn't approach them in anger or accusation. I framed it as concern for the kids and the culture of the school community. Some were hesitant at first, they didn't want to get involved, but once I showed them screenshots of Clara's posts, the small, cruel digs at other families, their interest turned into cautious cooperation. By the end of the day, I had a network of witnesses who could corroborate every claim I planned to present if things escalated legally or socially. Then came the hardest part, my own restraint. I knew Clara would expect me to react impulsively, call her out in a message, post publicly in anger, confront Alex in a dramatic scene. I didn't. I forced myself to breathe, to act only through carefully calculated channels. Every reaction I withheld made her confidence grow. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I had been defeated by her parking lot humiliation. She had no idea that my silence wasn't weakness, it was precision. I also prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Alex. He was kind-hearted but blind in his loyalty to Clara. I had to ensure that when he finally saw the truth, it would come from irrefutable evidence, not my words. I drafted emails and organized files in chronological order, showing not just what Clara had done to me, but the subtle ways she manipulated him, undermined our family bonds, and weaponized Emma's emotions. By the time he opened the file, there would be no doubt, no excuses, no plausible deniability. Finally, I planned the psychological element. Clara thrived on control, on the illusion that she could dictate how others saw her. My goal was to remove that entirely. I wasn't going to yell, I wasn't going to threaten, I was going to let the system, the evidence, and the community dismantle the world she had so carefully curated. Every post she'd ever published, every mocking comment, every slight toward me or Emma, would come back to her in a tidal wave she couldn't manage. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but alive with grim satisfaction. By tomorrow, when the board's findings were officially delivered, Clara would face the reality that her perfect little world was crumbling. And the best part, she would have no idea that I had orchestrated the timing so precisely, so that she thought her exposure was a random act of misfortune, not the culmination of weeks of careful planning. And then I remembered the post from the recital, the one where she mocked me publicly while I sat in the parking lot. My lips curved into a small, controlled smile. She had thought she had won. She had thought I was powerless. She had no idea what I had already set in motion. And by the time she realized it, it would be too late to stop it. The next morning, I was just about to leave for the school board follow-up when my phone buzzed. It was a direct message from Clara, something I wasn't expecting. She didn't call, she didn't text Alex, she messaged me directly. "I know what you're doing. You think you can ruin me. Don't forget who knows you best." My hand froze around the phone. Who knew me best? What could she possibly mean? I stared at the screen, heart pounding, mind racing. I had been careful, meticulous, invisible. Nothing had left my hands, no evidence leaked. And yet here she was, insinuating that she had some countermeasure in place. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity and instinct made me dig deeper. I checked my email, my recent calls, even my browser history. Nothing was out of place. And then it hit me, the someone else who had reported her online posts to the board, the one whose timing had been perfect. They hadn't acted alone. Someone had tipped Clara off. I sat down hard, the kitchen chair squealing beneath me. This wasn't just about her being reckless or arrogant anymore. She had allies, someone who knew I was orchestrating a response, someone who could be watching, anticipating. For the first time, the sense of control I had cultivated for weeks felt tenuous, fragile. And then the second twist landed like a punch in the gut. I opened one of Clara's tagged photos from the recital. In the background, barely noticeable, was my own reflection, not from the parking lot, but from a mirror she had strategically positioned in her post. She had taken a snapshot of me, my face framed perfectly in the reflection, then mocked me publicly. That was bad enough, but it meant she had been watching me far more closely than I realized. I realized in that moment that Clara's obsession with control wasn't just a personality quirk, it was dangerous. She knew my habits, my routines, even my methods of gathering evidence. Someone had given her a peek into my world, or maybe she had been observing me all along. The idea made my stomach churn. My careful timing, my carefully planned contingencies, they might already be compromised. Panic briefly threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I had to stay calm, precise. No emotion could leak. This wasn't a battle I could fight with brute force or anger. I had to escalate, but differently. I needed to account for the invisible hand I hadn't anticipated, the person or people feeding her breadcrumbs. I dug back into the school records, cross-referencing the board's contact logs, and realized something I hadn't expected. One of the parents I had reached out to, the one who seemed cooperative, had quietly alerted Clara. They weren't malicious, they were scared, thinking they were helping mediate. But in reality, they had handed Clara a fragment of my plan without realizing it. So everything I thought was private, everything I thought was perfectly timed, had a hole in it. My advantage had been partially compromised. Clara wasn't just cornered, she was aware enough to fight back. I felt a surge of adrenaline, sharper than before. This wasn't the time to retreat, it was the time to improvise, to pivot. My plan hadn't failed, it had just become more dangerous, more complex, more deliciously chaotic. If Clara thought she could intimidate me with threats or insinuations, she had another thing coming. I would use her awareness against her. Every attempt she made to regain control would be woven into the very trap I had set. And as I grabbed my coat and folder, ready to step into the board office again, I understood one terrifying truth. This was no longer just about proving her cruelty. It was about survival, for Emma, for Alex, for myself, and ensuring that Clara would never, ever feel untouchable again. By the time this was over, she wouldn't just be exposed, she would be undone. And the full reckoning was just beginning. By the time I walked back into that school building, I wasn't thinking about humiliation anymore. I wasn't thinking about social media posts or parking lots or even Clara's smug smile. I was thinking about Emma. Because the truth is, none of this started with me. It started 3 months ago on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I picked Emma up from school because Clara was running late. Emma got into my car, buckled herself in, and didn't say a word for the first 5 minutes. That wasn't like her. She used to talk non-stop about school, her friends, her piano lessons. But that day she just stared out the window, twisting her fingers together like she was trying to hold something inside. I asked her gently what was wrong. She hesitated. Then she said something that has been echoing in my head ever since. Mom says I have to be careful around you, because you get upset and make things about yourself. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself not to react, not to prove that exact point, so I just asked, "Do you think that's true?" And Emma, she shrugged. That was the worst part, not agreement, not denial, just uncertainty. That was the moment I knew Clara hadn't just been targeting me, she had been shaping Emma's perception of reality, quietly, consistently, rewriting who I was in my own granddaughter's mind. But it got worse. A week later, Emma had a minor meltdown before a piano lesson. Nothing dramatic, just nerves, the kind any child gets. But Clara's response wasn't comfort, it was control. She pulled Emma aside and said, in a low voice I wasn't meant to hear, "See, this is what happens when people stress you out. You don't want Grandma there, do you?" Emma nodded, not because she believed it, but because she wanted the pressure to stop. I saw it in her eyes. That wasn't agreement, that was survival. That's when I stopped being passive. Everything I did after that, the documentation, the calls, the patience, it wasn't about revenge. It was about breaking a pattern before it hardened into something permanent. Clara wasn't just excluding me. She was teaching Emma to associate love with anxiety, to equate family with tension, to believe that people could be quietly erased if they were inconvenient. And I refused to let that lesson stick. So when I walked into that office for the final time, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was focused. Because now the board wasn't just looking at social media posts or interpersonal conflict. They were looking at a pattern of emotional manipulation affecting a child in a school environment. And this time I didn't hold back. I spoke clearly, calmly. I described exactly what I had witnessed, not as a grandmother scorned, but as an adult concerned about a child being conditioned to fear and reject family members based on manufactured stress. I presented timelines, examples, corroborations from other parents who had seen similar behavior. Clara tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked this time, not dramatically, but enough for them to hear it, enough for them to notice the shift. And then came the moment I had been building toward, without even realizing it. Emma's music teacher spoke up, quietly but firmly. She described how Emma had become increasingly anxious before performances, how she would ask who was attending, how her mood would shift depending on the answer. She didn't mention Clara directly, but she didn't have to. The pattern was clear. For the first time, Clara looked cornered, not socially, not emotionally, structurally. There was no spin for this, no curated post to fix it. And I saw it hit her. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about her being seen, fully, clearly, without filters. She turned to me then, eyes sharp, something desperate creeping in, and in a low voice, barely controlled, she said, "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" I didn't answer, I didn't need to. Because at that moment, the board chair cleared his throat, folded his hands, and said something that made the entire room go still. And I knew this was it. The moment everything she built started to collapse. The room went completely silent when the board chair spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but final in a way that left no room for interpretation. Based on the evidence presented, we are opening a formal review regarding conduct that may be negatively impacting a student's emotional well-being. Effective immediately, We are requiring a family behavioral assessment and restricting parental presence at certain school events until this is resolved. Clara blinked once, twice, like her brain hadn't caught up yet. What? She said too quickly. That's ridiculous. You can't. This is just a family disagreement. It is no longer being treated as a private matter, he interrupted. This involves school-related behavior and a student under our care. And just like that, the control she had spent years building cracked in a way I had never seen before. Because this wasn't something she could charm her way out of. It wasn't a social media comment she could delete or a narrative she could rewrite. This was documented, institutional, permanent. Her image, the perfect, composed, untouchable mother, had just been formally questioned by an authority she couldn't manipulate. She turned to Alex then, eyes wide, searching for support, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the folder in front of him, the one I had quietly made sure he received that morning. Every screenshot, every message, every moment he had missed or dismissed. Alex, she said, her voice tightening, you know this is being blown out of proportion. But he didn't answer right away, he just kept turning pages, slowly, carefully, like each one weighed more than the last. I didn't know, he finally said, quiet, flat. And that was the moment everything truly broke. Because Clara didn't lose her composure when the board spoke, she didn't lose it when the teacher backed up the concerns. She lost it when she realized Alex was no longer on her side. Her voice shifted, sharper now, desperate under the surface. She's twisting things, you know how she is, she's always been. Stop, Alex said. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. I had never heard that tone from him before, not toward her. The room felt smaller after that, tighter, like all the air had been pulled out. The board outlined next steps, evaluations, restrictions, follow-ups, but Clara barely seemed to hear them. Her world had narrowed to one thing, loss of control. And I just sat there, quiet, still, watching it happen. Because the truth is, I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed to remove the illusion she had built around herself. Everything after that, that was the natural consequence of who she had always been. By the time we left the building, parents were already whispering, not loudly, not cruelly, but enough that the shift had begun. The same social circles she used to control perception were now quietly questioning it. Her post stopped that day, completely, no explanations, no jokes, just silence. Alex called me that night, not to argue, not to defend her, just to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. And Emma. A week later, she had another small performance. Nothing formal, just a classroom thing. This time, no one told me to stay outside. I sat in the front row. And when she walked up to the piano, she looked at me, really looked this time. Not uncertain, not conflicted, just steady. She played better than I had ever heard her play. And when it was over, she smiled, not the polite kind, a real one. That was the only victory I needed. As for Clara, the last I heard, she was still trying to explain things, still trying to regain control of a narrative that no longer belonged to her. But it didn't matter anymore. Because the system saw her. The school saw her. Her husband saw her. And most importantly, Emma no longer feared me.